They told me never to follow the path between the pumpkins after sundown, but I always thought rules were for other people. The night I got lost, something else was waiting to teach me that lesson. I remember the way the air felt first, the kind of cold that sits on the skin like a pressed thumb, not sharp but heavy, full of damp and old leaves. My breath came out in small white ghosts that dissolved before I could watch them. The field smelled of wet earth and hollowed flesh, the sweet, sour rot of pumpkins left too long in October. Overhead, the trees made a black wall, their trunks etched against the sky like the ribs of something sleeping. It was easy at first to convince myself I was still at a party. There had been laughter, paper hats, neon face paint smeared on cheeks. But the laughter had been a long way off even when I left, and now the only sounds were the dry snap of my shoes on brittle stems and the soft, distant whisper of wind through the corn. I had a little plastic bucket with me, the kind with a painted cat smile, and for a stupid, childish minute, I held it like proof. I was supposed to be trick-or-treating, not wandering a field alone. The moon had been generous earlier, thin and pale, but clouds had swallowed much of it, and shadows pooled between the pumpkins like ink. The jack-o'-lanterns around me were badly carved, toothy grins collapsed into wet hollows, their candles guttered and died, leaving more dark than light. Every so often, I would catch the faint orange glow of a candle and head toward it, only to find the pumpkin cold and empty when I reached it. The light would be gone, as if someone had blown it out from across the field. At first, I blamed my phone. The map app promised a straight line back to the road, but the map kept jumping, the little blue dot stuttering like a trapped insect. Then the air itself seemed wrong. The silence was too careful, as if the night were listening. My ears began to play tricks on me, a footstep that sounded behind me but belonged to no one, the thin scrape of cloth where there should have been none. I told myself it was nerves, the kind that make your skin itch and your palms damp. I told myself that being alone at night in a place you only half remember can do things to a person. And yet, when I stopped, holding my bucket so hard my knuckles ached, I could feel it, a presence like a weight in the dark, a patient thing standing just beyond the ring of dying light. It had no smell, no breath, but the hair on my arms rose as though someone had walked a cold finger along my spine. I turned slowly, thinking I would see a stray teenager or a prankster with a mask, but what stepped out from the shadow between two trunks was not a prank. It was a small shape, childlike, hunched and still, and when it raised what might have been its head, two pale drops of light hung where eyes should be. My mouth went dry. My feet did not obey me. When it moved closer, I realized it didn't walk so much as unspooled itself from the darkness, a slow, folding motion that made the trees seem to breathe around it. The thing was smaller than I expected, wrapped in a dress with the kind of puffed sleeves children wear in old photographs. Its hands were pale and too long, fingers curled around the rim of a pumpkin-shaped pail that matched mine. The pail had a stitched smile, and in its hollowness, something flickered like candlelight, but every time I tried to focus, the light seemed to bend away from me, like a secret retreating into the body of the thing holding it. It made a sound then, not words, but a soft, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles on wood, and under it, deeper, a hum that vibrated in my teeth. The resonance threaded through the ground and into my soles until I felt as if I were standing on someone else's heartbeat. I lifted my free hand to my throat and found it damp with sweat. The world had narrowed to the space between us. The pumpkins around our feet had become a circle of patient mouths. Their carved smiles, once childish, edged towards something knowing, and the stems glistened with a wetness that wasn't dew. I remember thinking that if I walked away slowly, if I put as much space as I could between me and that light, the thing would lose interest. So I took a step. The thing copied me, not with the same step, but with a movement that matched the rhythm of my breath. When I quickened my pace, it quickened. When I froze, it froze. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of shadow, of fatigue, a pattern-obsessed brain making sense of randomness. Then it began to hum my name. It wasn't quite my name at first. The syllables came soft, layered with the rustle of dead grass, and they sounded like names my grandparents used to call me, softer versions I hadn't heard since childhood. Each whisper worked like thread through an old wound, pulling memory taut. A memory flashed. My mother sitting at a kitchen table, carving a pumpkin so deeply the knife slipped and we all laughed until we didn't. Another memory, a Halloween I could not remember living through, a party where I left early and a friend joked I had vanished. The whispers stitched those nights to the present until I couldn't tell which voice belonged to whom. Panic rose like warm bile. I turned to run, and the field rearranged itself. The rows of pumpkins that had been a rough grid now formed a corridor lined with faces. Their mouths opened into shadows that breathed cold. From the darkness on either side, two more small figures stepped forward, identical to the first, each with glassy, candle-bright drops for eyes. They did not speak. They tilted their heads in a lullaby motion and began to sway, a slow metronome that matched my pulse and untied my sense of time. Then my bucket buzzed. Not a noise, but a press against my palm, as if something inside it were waking. I looked down and for the briefest instant saw, in place of the painted cat, a real, small face looking back at me. Eyes like my own, mouth turned up in a smile that was everything I had ever feared and everything I had ever wanted. I screamed, but the sound bulged out like a balloon and was swallowed between the trunks. The figures closed distance without running. They closed like hands, shutting around a promise. I realized, with a clarity that cut through the fog of fear, that whatever these things were, they weren't trying to scare me away. They were trying to teach me how to stay. The realization that they wanted me to stay arrived in a cold, surgical click. Not as a thought, but as a shifting of my center of gravity. It was simpler than a trap. It was a curriculum. The three small figures moved in a slow, deliberate choreography, and each motion felt like a lesson. One tilted its head, and the field tightened around us, the path behind me folding into a seam. Another lifted its pail, and the hollow sound inside echoed like a bell. The first tapped the rim in a measured pattern, and with every tap, a piece of me settled into place. A memory, a name, the warmth of a hand I no longer remembered holding mine. I fought. I tried to run through the corridor of carved faces, but the pumpkins did not let me pass. Their mouths closed against my legs like soft, damp cloth. When I pushed, the faces seemed to breathe in unison, the carved ridges flexing against my shins. Panic made me wildly inventive. I shouted to wake someone. I flailed toward the faint road smell of tar and headlights. I swore and promised and begged the sky to open. Nothing answered but the slow, patient hum of those voices, and inside each hum a photograph of something I had lost. A laugh, a scar, a name I had not said aloud in years. Each sound wove me thinner and tighter until I felt as if someone were threading me through the eye of a needle. They showed me how to be small. They showed me how to tilt my head and wait. They taught me the rhythm of the night until my own breathing matched the cadence of their tapping. It was not violence that broke me, but repetition. The gentle, insistent calibration of an instrument until it yielded the exact note desired. I remember the moment my hands loosened on my bucket, the buzzing pressed like a polite hand at the base of my palm, and when I opened my fingers, the painted face inside was no longer paint. It was a face with my eyes. For a sliver of time, a flaring, holy/terrible instant, I recognized my own expression reflected back, the same small hope I used to have when I believed someone would call me home. Then a candle was placed against my chest, cold and trembling, and light leaked into the place where breadcrumb trail memories pooled. The world thinned to wax and wick and the shallow, animal warmth of flame. I could still think, thoughts like thin threads, but they were woven now into a lattice of acceptance. My voice changed when I tried to call out. It tasted of smoke. I felt my jaw set into something permanent, my lips arranging into a smile that no longer belonged to the frightened person who had run into the field. They arranged us in a circle afterward, pumpkins and small bodies and the things that had become both. From the trunks beyond, more shapes watched, learning. I learned the lullaby of names to murmur when a stray found the path. I learned to tilt my head in a way that made people stop. I learned to hold the light so it looked like hope. If you ever wander between the pumpkins and the shadows, lean in too close, you might hear a voice that sounds like someone you used to know. Welcome home.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.